So I'd like to begin by paying tribute to all the people that organised all this, and I think you probably all agree that it has been fantastic. You know, the keynote speech was fantastic, really brilliant, and we learned a lot from that. And I think the keynote speech pointed out, you know, the values that's required in the world to take us out of the awful place we're in at the minute. You know, and he was telling people the way that 90 over 100 years ago. But it's wonderful for the people that have organised all this, the work they put into it. And I know from previous times trying to organise stuff like this, it's really hard work. So we'll give them all a round of applause, all the people involved. So behind me is Patrick asked me to read talk about the times of A. Russell. So I think he was giving me a palette there, a clear palette to work away. So I tried to think about how I would do this, what'll I do? So I tried to put him in context, of where he was and what was happening through his life. Now behind me is an image there that very, very few people have ever seen. It's the chapel in Lurgan, St. Peter's Chapel, and the sexton of it is a good friend of mine. And he says to me, "Do you want to see something nobody has ever seen? Only myself and, maybe somebody doing a bit of maintenance or something." So this is the bell of the chapel in St. Peter's Chapel. Now, so, and the context of that is that, if you think about the penal laws, and landlords get a bad press, but our landlord was Lord Brownlow, and the Brownlows, during the penal times, give us the land for this chapel during the penal times. And this is the first bell, the first Catholic bell anyway, in Lurgan. And it came 2 years before he left for Dublin. So what I've written here is, the bell was made by Murphys of Dublin and arrived in the town on Tuesday the 19th of September by rail. And he, spent a lot of his time on rail. It was the second largest bell in Ulster, and the first being St. Malachy's in Belfast, which was set up by an all Lurgan man, by the way. Anyway, George Russell was an extremely rare offering for Ireland at a time of immense social and political upheaval. Like the Buddhism of the Dalai Lama, perhaps the reincarnation of a great ancient Irish druid in an Anglo-Irish body. 2 years after the arrival of the Dublin forged bell, we returned that serve and we delivered the bell that would be A. Russell, who would chime and rhyme all over Dublin and all over the world eventually. And so this was welcomed not just in Ireland but across the Atlantic, and his wisdom was eagerly sought and very much welcome. The biographer of Countess Margaret, she wrote that A.E. created the modern identity of Ireland. And of course he was doing that, and we heard all about the journals he was writing and how he was forming the mind of these farmers, but not just farmers, all people were buying as well. But if you think of the idea of these farmers, and of two lovely people from farming backgrounds here, and so these farmers were buying magazines, and he was telling them, as you've seen there in the birds, he was telling them about eggs and how to husbandry of the cattle. And then the next thing he was telling them, and guess what? Your mythology is one of the greatest mythologies in the world, and you should know about it. And he was bringing that revival of an expert on Irish mythology here. So he was reviving this and putting it into the minds of ordinary farmers. Along with telling them all about how great art can be, he was telling them about all the art around the world, and he was improving their minds. So that's the kind of man we're talking about. And so I've written here the biography said about he was an immense presence in Ireland from the 1890s to the 1930s, enabling most of the geniuses of the Irish Golden Age, which is the Irish Literary Revival. Many, if not all, had sipped from his well. So, just what I like about the bell is somebody's written "new" on it. So I don't know if it was somebody up there doing maintenance or if that was originally written on it. And you can see the date there on it. So as I said, very few people have ever seen it. So it had come from Dublin, and so we sent our bell back to Dublin. This is Lurgan Park, where he would have spent his youth, walking about. So you can see how beautiful it is, and Harry was forming ideas in there in his head. And so these trees, meant a lot to him as well. He was underneath these trees all the time in Lurgan Park. And that's an aerial view of Lurgan Park there. So it's a walk right round, beautiful walk right round. And this is the castle here, or Brownlow House. People refer to it as, there is the chapel where the bell came from. So he lived in around about here. He was just down the road from the chapel and the Brownlow House. And he was wandering around this parkland as a child. So the beautiful parkland to roam about in. And there had been a bog pool there before. In the ancient time, the area was called the Docker. And there was a dark cairn there, an ancient dark cairn there, but when the English came, they took the rocks from the cairn and they built Brownlow House or what is the castle and things they got there. So the cairn's no longer there. But so if you believe in these, what do you call them, sort of radiating energies, ancient energies, and if this is the reason why he picked some of these ancient energies up from the Docker, I'm not sure about that things, but all people do believe that, and perhaps this is where a lot of these. This is the first place he was getting these visions from. And he painted this, thinking back about his childhood land in Lurgan Park. And these were what he was seeing in the daffodils in Lurgan Park. These were the wee figures he was seeing. And this is him. And this is the wee poem he wrote, Effervescence. It flickered mid the daffodils and danced their gentle dance, then rose up splendidly in the air. It was as still as a trance. It entered in, the magic thing, into your being flowed, through lips and eyes and flooded hair, its precious substance glowed. So, he was born, as you know, in 1867, and that year there was a famous dog won its first race. And so the bus to that dog's in the middle of Lurgan, by the way, and his bus is hidden away in the town hall out of view, which I think's remarkable. But anyway, and the dog was famous for having a song read about it, And as you know, he's born in William Street. But the time he was born, it was the time of the Fenian Rising, the Fenian Flame, and the Manchester Martyrs. There was another boy born at the same time, a famous boxer called Ike Weir, went to America and became a world champion boxer in America at the time, and defended. He was jailed for defending a black lady, which was an outrage at that time. A black lady getting beat up, he goes and defends her, and he gets jailed for that. But the judge then felt pity on him, lets him out and rewards him. But anyway, that's a different story. So I'm going to read you the declaration that the Fenians had. They had declared, our rights and our liberties have been trampled on by an alien aristocracy, who treated us as foes, usurped our lands, and drew away from our unfortunate country all the material riches. We declare also in favour of absolute liberty of conscience and a separation of church and state. We intend no war against the people of England. Our war is against the aristocrats, locusts, whether English or Irish, who have eaten the verdure of our fields. So AE himself would make great strides to complete all this in a peaceful manner, not in the manner, of course, that the Fenians had reverted to, which was violence. So if we think of it, he would get together any of these people and warn them, don't go down the road. We don't need to go down the road of violence. We can do this with our brains, our intellect, and our character. In 1870, Gladstone's first Land Act, the Home Rule movement, was founded by Isaac Butt, who was a family friend of the Yeatses, and would go to the house there By the way, the Yeats' father came from not far from Lurgan as well, a place called Tullalish, which is down the road. And he was a frequent visitor to Lurgan and to the home of the Yeatses. While living in the Brownlow estate, he had access to the parklands, as I showed you, where he came to love the beauty and nature and experienced his first spiritual visions. I showed you that as well. Fermenting 11 formative years in Lurgan, the years of hard metal that forged his character. And in the lost childhood of Judas, Jesus was betrayed. But he was the opposite of that. He never ever betrayed anybody. He loved Lurgan, but was very aware of its sectarian troubles. He was born, and he was living on a fault line, sectarian fault line. At that time, it has moved a bit now, but at that time where he lived, that was the fault line. He's seen these, people beating lumps out of each other and rats and things going on all around him. So 1 year after he had left, one of his neighbours, a young fella similar age to himself, I think he was a year younger than him, he was shot dead it was like a riot had broke out, and the RAC declared a riot, and so they shot him dead. So slide 7, that should be. He, aged 11, in 1878, his father had accepted an offer of employment from his friend Robert Gardner, later Sir Robert Gardner. He was the future. So the company that he had founded would be one. You would have heard of it, Price Waterhouse Empire. That's what it would evolve into. This company that his daddy worked for, and I believe Michael Collins worked for him as well. Yeah. So he moves to 33 Amaverl Avenue, and he attends the Dr. Parr's School in Harrington Street, Portobello. So, does anybody know who lived in this house? Huh? Well, it's more, who was conceived in this house? Well, this is where James Joyce was conceived, a few doors up from where A.E. was living at the time, 11-year-old A.E. He was conceived, I'm serious, this is where he was conceived. And a few months later, they move, and he's born then, and he's not born here, he's conceived in this house, 2 doors up from A.E. Russell. Well, anyway. Yeah. Well, James Joyce's parents, John Stanislas and Mary Joyce, lived at the 30 Amaverl Avenue after they were married in 1881. It's highly likely James Joyce was conceived at 30 Amaverl Avenue. There you go.
This is a new literary tour of Dublin.
Yeah, there you go. So, in 1880, well, the next time you're at I was going to say it at the statue, and then it says, I'll keep it for later. When you're at the Joyce statue. So in 1880, he enrolls as a day student in the Metropolitan School of Art on Kildare Street. He meets his lifelong friend and occasional nemesis, who was Yeats. Anyway, Joseph Mary Plunkett famously suffered from tuberculosis, and in 1884, the streets of Dublin and the area of Dublin was rampant with poverty and wretchedness and disease. A. Russell's closest friend, his sister, 1 year older than him, dies at the age of 19, what was called consumption then, but tuberculosis, and on the 13th of October in 1884, and his aunt had come from Armagh to look after her, because we know that when we went into the records of the Shields house, she was missing from the Shields house, because you have to sign yourself out of it, and she was missing the time of the illness of the wee sister, so she'd come the whole way from Armagh to look after her, so she was in the house along with the family. In 1885, the family moves to 67 Grosvenor Square, Dublin, around the corner from Yeats. Yeats' Ashfield Terrace home, actually. The Yeats' family witnessed a strange youth pass by their window. Their servant called him the strayed angel. WB went to the art school and found him there, turning his study of a nude, and I heard about that earlier on, and while everybody was looking at the nude, he was painting these angelic figures. So maybe he was blacking out the nude, I'm not sure. So it says here into a St. John in the desert, with some reminiscence of Da Vinci, perhaps obstructing his sight. Both attended the school, and by the way, Yeats' father taught at the school. He taught the night classes at the school, so I would just assume that he was teaching both AE and Yeats as well. So that was important for their careers, and it was there. Somebody mentioned a picture of the sculptor as him as a young fella, right? So at that, and I said I thought Oliver Shepherd went there as well. So Oliver Shepherd did. Just remember right now, Oliver Shepherd and John Hughes both went to the school with them as well. The two used to recite their poems to each other in the kitchen of Yeats' house in Ashfield Terrace. So I think it was Michael's brother Brian, wherever he got it from. He said he believed that he had felt a sympathy for Yeats, because Yeats wanted to be like his father, a great artist, and his sister's artist, but he wasn't a very good, he was very poor artist. And he sort of said, "Sure, we'll take up the poetry." The two of them took up the poetry, and they were bouncing the poetry of each other. And people forget this: for 10 years of Yeats's first formative poetry life, he was bouncing it off AE, and AE was bouncing his off his, And so I think that's an important thing, to remember. So Russell's father is said to first met Yeats when he was roused in the small hours by what he thought was someone trying to break in, trying to break his upstairs window, sorry. And so he goes out, and who is it? But it's a young Yeats throwing pebbles up the wake of AE. What do you think of this poem, or this line? So that's the kind of life that was going on when he was young. And this is the Pims where he goes, and he hated working there in Pims because it was very boring. And we heard earlier on there about Catherine Tynan. There's a lot of these things you have already heard, by the way. So you heard what Catherine Tynan has said about him. So I'm not going to read it out again, but we were on the same page with that one. Anyway. So Yeats brought his friend Catherine Tynan and George Russell to visit William Morris, the great arts and craft founder, And so Yeats' younger sister, she was a wonderful embroiderer, and she was working for the Morris. She was working with the Morris. That's where they learned their trade. And I think they actually lived close by them, maybe in the same street even. So the next slide, 9, that must be it. Yeah, there, Pims. In 1890, he started work at Pim's store. So Parnell dies in Brighton in October 1891. And so Maud Gonne is seen coming off the ferry. And as far as I know, it's the same ferry that Parnell's body's on. And she's dressed in black, right? And everybody assumes, because she was a great favourite, she loved Parnell, as did AE and all them. And she was really badly shaking and crying and all that there. But it wasn't for Parnell that was breaking her heart. She had a child, an illegitimate child, who she told everybody she had adopted, right? So the child dies, and Yeats tries to console her, and he brings her to AE, and they have a bit of a seance. And of course, typical AE, like nothing simple, he says, "Oh yes, we can reincarnate this child, but you have to go back to France, and you have to make love to the original father of the child on the tomb of the child." What's to do? And I've seen the pictures of. They actually had to climb down a ladder way down into the tomb to do it. Only AE would come up with something like that there, But this is where Iseult. It's out of this that Iseult is comes from anyway. So that's that famous story. So we'll move on then. In 1896, AE wrote "To Stand Is So Greedy" in Masonic expectation. The gods have returned to Erin, and we have centered themselves on the sacred mountains and blow those fires through the country. The universal heart of the people will return to the old druidical beliefs. In 1897, AE was recommended to Horace Plunkett by Yeats, who was seeking organisers for the fledgling cooperative movement. AE, who provided himself to have a strong practical streak alongside his early mysticism. But AE's family were bookkeepers, and they were bookkeepers for the linen industry, and they were bookkeepers for the farmers, right? So AE had a brilliant economic mind as well already from his childhood. He'd learned all that. He was brilliant at economics. And he would become brilliant at agriculture as well. But so he travelled by bicycle around the rural Ireland, promoting the virtues of the agricultural cooperative movement. I might have missed it. No, it didn't. So slide 9, 10, 11, whatever it is. So we have this is a sketch of AE and Singh at the back and Yeats in the middle in Cool Park, right? So it's interesting that AE's put to the fore and Yeats is looking very miserable in the middle and there's Singh at the back. I just think it's a brilliant image, like, you know. So obviously AE was highly thought of, you know. So AE shared with Yeats and a belief in the ancient Ireland's spiritual qualities, and this threw him into the broad nationalist tradition at the turn of the century. He was part of the Irish literary revival. So that's a very hard one to read, isn't it? So this is the woman who, this woman Horniman is the one who gives all the money towards helping to found the Irish literary revival, you know, the theatre. So A.E.'s journey was first published in the All Ireland Review, as we heard from Felix, in 1901, and first performed in April 2nd, 1902, at St. Teresa's Temple Hall. Yeats' Cavity in the Houlihan, it came as a supporting act on top of it. That's what I reckon anyway, but maybe Felix will disagree with that one. And yeah, so he conceived that play, and as Felix quite rightly pointed, as a protest against his sense of the degradation of the Gaelic heroes in Moore's and Yeats' play Dermot Grania. And we heard wonderfully explained that all by Felix. He became a vice president of the Irish National Theatre Society, and in 1902 later the Abbey Theatre Company, which relied on A's organisational expertise for the new Abbey Company. First as now this is the interesting bit, it was run as a cooperative. And this was what the row was over. So Yeats and wanted to change it from being a cooperative till it was going into the hands of 3 directors. And he was totally against that. But he gives in. Later regrets it. But he also says that Yeats will regret it. Because he thought it was a bit silly, because Yeats is going to have to dedicate all his time to running all this here. But not only there was a lot of the actors, and Maud Gonne also left. Maud Gonne left, and A left, and so did a lot of the actors. And so Yeats faced many disagreements from the actors and members like George Russell. In letters to Yeats, he reprehended his friend for his cutting words when Yeats addressed those who supported Russell as singing canaries and poultry farmers. So Russell in his letter wrote, "I think it's a mistake which later you may regret, and you should not lose time managing a business." Disregarding the disagreements, Yeats continued his fight adamantly for the control of the theatre. Yeats became more and more uncompromising and drove out major contributors and nationalist members of the theatre, namely Maud Gonne and Russell themselves, and some of the great actors as well. So, Colston Avenue. And who's living next door today in Colston Avenue? Maud Gonne. The next door neighbour. Colston Avenue, in 1903, they lived at 25. Maud Gonne was the next door neighbour, and Constance and Casimir Markovich lived around the corner. In 1898, he married Violet North. In 1900, his father Thomas dies. Brian is born, and they move to Colston Avenue. For a time, their next door neighbour in Colston Avenue was Maud Gonne, while Constance said that they were around the corner. On setting up in Colston Avenue, George Russell remarked that the Gore Booth girl who married the Polish count with the unspeakable name is going to settle near Dublin. We might get the materials for a revolt. He wasn't far wrong there. So as a journalist in 1905, he became the journalist for the Homestead, later the Irish Statesman. During that eventful quarter of a century, he became an accomplished journalist, an energetic editor, and a political commentator of some consequence. Celtic mythology to the animal husbandry, ambitious visions for its economic and social evolution based on the principles of cooperation and alternative Conway. That's what I was explaining to you earlier on. So he could talk about anything. You know, he's a wonderful.
Jimmy, you go back to the slide there, the previous slide. Do I see some sort of representation of the cloud up there?
It could be.
Is that AE floating around?
Yeah, funny things. As you know, funny things happen around AE. You know. Yeah. So 26 Mulgawn's house there. Oh, we'll go back to Mulgawn's again. I haven't finished that, I don't think. Oh yeah, that's. So you know the one about Mulgawn anyway, and the Battle of Colston Avenue. So the king is coming to visit, and the Irish Nationalist Party they're falling over to welcome him. So Mulgawn organises this movement to go and oppose all this, and they actually go the big meeting that the Irish National Party or Irish Parliamentary Party, the Nationalists are holding a big massive meeting. Mulgawn goes to the meeting, of course, and disrupts the whole thing. Her and her wee band of men, including AE, and AE called it the most glorious battle that Dublin ever had, you know. And there's chairs flying and everything they get there, and she just disrupts this whole thing, like. And that's the start, believe it or not. That group, Griffiths was in it, and Seamus McManus was part of it, and that was the embryo of Sinn Féin. And she never gets credited with that. Mulgawn is left out of that picture, never mentioned, never written about. And Griffiths, he had a newspaper called Sinn Féin, and the movement then became known as Sinn Féin. But that was the embryo of, that's where it all started. So she's living beside AE, and the king's coming, and all her friends are very patriotic, British, and they've all the flags, British flags out. So Mulgawn, she gets her bloomers off, puts them on black bloomers, by the way, puts them out a pole, and the whole ride goes on. The RIC are coming to try and get this down, and her England here, they're coming down, and they're trying to protect her, and poor Valet's out trying to calm things down, and AE's running about panic. You can just imagine the scene going on, like, you know, and she's running about with a gun. Now, they said it wasn't a real gun, that it was a perfume bottle, it looked like a gun or something like that, but she's threatening all these people with this gun, like, you know. So, that's mad scene anyway. So they get the bloomers and pull them down. But what they didn't realise was they're only half of her bloomers. She had ripped them in half, and so she puts the other half back out again. So that's the Battle of Colston. That's the where AE's living, and the madness that they're living, or it's a wonderful scene. It's called the Battle of Colston Avenue, and so the next part is about Countess Markovich's brother, Jocelyn. So he sets up a cooperative up there in Sligo. Countess Markovich's brother, Jocelyn Corbu, was a follower of AE. Jocelyn was introduced to Horace Plunkett by George Russell. In 1883, Jocelyn and Russell were pioneering agriculturists and innovators and new technologies. And you were mentioning about the plants out in Arizona and things like that. Well, they were experimenting in Ireland with wee plants and all that. There, he beautiful flowers and you know, and I think they might even up in Lissadale, they still have a lot of the flowers that he pioneered. You know, so this is the whole thing going through with these people. They love plants and nature, and they're always working with that sort of thing. And in 1880, Jocelyn established the Drumcliff Dairy Society in Sligo Manufacturing Society. The co-op. He was also the first landlord in Ireland to sell his land to his tenants after the 1903 Land Act. His sister Eva, who becomes very, very close to AE, became heavily involved in the suffragettes and the women's suffrage. Eva submitted her poetry to AE for the homestead, which she supported for many years. She worked for the poor, crowded Irish working class in the Ancoats area. You would know it well. The world's first industrial suburb. There she became a close friend of Christabel Pankhurst, the daughter of Emmeline Pankhurst. Russell, as editor of the homestead, he was promoting cooperativism among the rural communities, establishing the precursor of the modern credit unions. Another of A.E. Russell's closest friends was Sir Hugh Law of Marble Hill, established another agricultural cooperative based in nearby Clonahorky. So that Amerville neighbour, who had been conceived 2 doors up, approached in late spring of 1904 he approached Joyce, or approached A. Joyce showed the early parts of Stephen Hero to A. who invited him to write stories for the homestead. Something simple, lively, and adapted to the common understanding. And of course, he wrote the Dubliners, which wouldn't be simple or easy for the commoner to understand. But anyway, that was in August 1904, and uniquely signed them Stephen Daedalus. So A had explained to him, look, you should pick a name to call yourself something else by. For I think the reason that they did that was in case they get sued or something like that. There, gives them a wee bit of protection. But anyway, Nora Barnacle was staying at Finn's Hotel when Joyce first met her on the afternoon of the 10th of June 1904. And where was Joyce coming from? He had just met him there because that was where the first United Arts Club was there. Mm-hmm. Yep, Lincoln. So Cassie and Colin knew Hugh Linn well, and this is the Markoviches, and had campaigned on his behalf for the last 10 years. In 1904, Cassie opened a public meeting in support of Linn with a speech in French, so followed by Willie Yeats and George Moore. Cassie painted his sensitive portrait of A. Yes, should have that. That's back there. This is the portrait that Cassie painted. It's not coming out very well, not there. It's been, but is it?
There's an exhibition on Casimir.
Okay. It's beautiful, but it's really good.
Including that.
Yeah. So.
There's a section on it. Yeah, right in the core of it. And United Arts Club mentioned.
So, and you can see here, I know Joyce parodies a lot, right? But he also, you can see it coming through in his writing that he loves him and he regards him as his inspirator. Certainly, he calls him, this funny word here, Pomander, which means the good shepherd. So that's, so it says there, the image alludes to Yea's role as an agrarian reformer, the good shepherd. So he has a high regard for him, even though he parodies him, makes fun of him. He doesn't hate him. It's a bit like, as we heard earlier on, somebody said that he wasn't a genius of a poet, but I think that's open to interpretation. I think he is. And that's who's in the middle of the whole committee of the Hugh Linn. So orchestrating everything, he's man. They're all revolving around A. Russell. A, the key figure in all progressive cultural ventures in the early 20th century Ireland, had been their vice president, a foundation member and a generous supporter. So he was a foundation member and a generous supporter. And when he died, Bodkin, I think Bodkin's in there somewhere. Bodkin replaces A. A new gallery was proposed for the Hugh Linn collection in St Stephen's Green, or a dramatic bridge built over the River Liffey. So imagine if I hadn't got those, I'll tell you later on what he calls them, but anyway, we stopped us building this beautiful gallery over the Liffey. What would that have been like? He was enraged by the failure of the Irish Parliamentary Party Corporation to provide a gallery to enable the city to take up the offer of the Hugh Linn collection. They were the meanest, the most uncultured, the most materialistic and canting crowd which ever made a citizen ashamed of his fellow countrymen. In the light of the subsequent events, it was surely significant that William Murphy was one. So William Murphy was the biggest objector to the Hugh Linn Gallery. So he was one of the most significant opponents of the gallery proposal. The same Murphy responsible for the lockout in 1913. A. highly regarded as an artist, and in 1913, with the support and encouragement of the lawyer John Quinn, his paintings were shown at the Armory Show in New York. I think there's a beach painting somewhere. This is one of the ones that was shown at the Armory in New York. And I would hazard a guess that it's Dunfanaghy. The painting was bought from the artist by John Quinn It listed in a letter from A. Russell to Quinn on the 17th of October 1980, in which the artist confirms that it had been packed along with other paintings to send to New York. It was exhibited at the American Art Gallery in 1927 as part of the John Quinn collection. We'll leave it for her. Yeah. Yep. So an 1813 lockout. So Dreyfus, I was going to ask you about Dreyfus and his wonderful letter, why do you pronounce it JQs? JQs. And his wonderful letter of the 1913 lockout has been compared with it, and its importance and its brilliance. So during the lockout of the 1930, Countess Markovitch was drawn into the industrial movement of which was at the time. Jim Larkin, your mate, was the colourful Dublin leader, and James Conley, the Belfast representative. 20,000 men and women had been locked out by William Martin Murphy, the big employers of labour under the peculiar harsh circumstances. His fine letter to the press, entitled An Open Letter to the Employers of Dublin, exposed the terrible conditions of the starvation of the Dublin poor. Following the 1908 election, in which the Redmanite Nationalist Party secured the balance of power at Westminster and took control of the Department of Agriculture and control of the cooperative movement and the Irish Agricultural Organisation Societies, Mattis Grant was withdrawn. Battle lines were drawn up. But these battles with them left a bitter view of the nationalist establishment of the day. Before the events of 1913 in Dublin, in the early 1912, AE warned that we anticipate labour troubles during the next 2 years, which will make the labour troubles of the past seem a mere murmur of gnats. He told the readers of the Irish Homestead, Larkin is not the cause of labour discontent, he is the product of it. As the first food ships arrived from Britain, AE was already to be found at the Liberty Hall food kitchens. And at this time, Sean O'Casey was still a friend before he falls out with him, recalled, looking like a teddy bear, he would thunder slowly, heavily in, spluttering and sparkling around him. Nor did this famous letter of 7th of October come out of the blue. According to Darrell Figgis, AE rallied to the support of those locked out at an early stage, joining the Industrial Peace Committee, which became the Civic League, and out of which the Irish Citizen Army developed. Not only did AE consider it to be an earlier leading light of it, Captain James White, a marvellous gentleman, but also that AE had designed the flag for them, the Story Plough. Late October was marked by the attempt to evacuate children to the friendly homes in Britain, one foiled by the despicable alliance of clergy, bigotry, Hibernians and nationalists. It was an episode that inspired each to break cover in support of the strikers, and much to the praise of AE. So Larkin was imprisoned for sedition on the 20th of October. AE contributed to a savagely satirical article to the Union newspaper, The Irish Worker, a prelude to AE's appearance at a great protest meeting in the Albert Hall on the 1st of November. On the stage with AE was James Conley, Delia Larkin, Sylvia Parkhurst, and J.B. Shaw, George Bernard Shaw. AE denounced the Dublin Six of the Irish Parliamentary Party as miserable creatures, poltroons, and democratic blatherers for deserting the workers and toadying to the church. AE's speech, of course, was savagely attacked, and what AE said was that people are to us either human or subhuman. They're either on the side of those who are fighting for human conditions or trying to degrade it and thrust us into the abyss. So they were trying to get AE sacked. The Freeman's Journal tried to get him sacked. The Freeman's Journal claimed that Russell was one of those manipulating the Dublin working class in the interests of international syndicalism and socialism and anti-Christian as well as anti-Catholic sentiment. The Nationalist MP, Stephen Gwynn, condemned the violent denunciation by the Freeman's Journal of a man of genius. I would be ashamed, this is AE, I would be ashamed ever in my life again to speak of an ideal if I did not stand by these men. And that's his famous Dublin strike that he wrote. Mm-hmm. And so that was what O'Casey said was the original story play. It wasn't the green and gold one that flew in the 1916 Rising, which was one associated with the violence. A's was a banner. And I reckon there was another pole here to carry it. And as you can see, the red hand of Ulster on it. So I always wondered about this star here. There's always metaphors in whatever A does. So there's a meaning to this star down here, but I haven't figured it out. So A's, it's mentioned by the Irish Insurgent Army that they marched out under AE's banner. So you can see it's a banner, it's not a flag really. But anyway. 6 months to the Rising, the surface, AE senses that old dragons are stirring one more time. And he says, the dragons of the past have not died and were only sleeping. Recent events have stirred them. AE was uneasy in a letter to a friend that we are going to have one more heart-searching trial, and that within the next few years. So he felt, he was feeling, he had a good, people talk about this clairvoyance, but that was just his intelligence was telling him that this was coming. In the aftermath of the 1916 Rising, AE sought to raise funds for James Connolly's widow to relocate to the States. Now, just before Connolly was about to be executed, he called the wife in and he says, AE will look after you. Go to AE. And he looked after his son. Son got into some trouble in school or something like that, and AE was looking after his son as well. So we're very, very close. Violet and AE looked after Constance Markovich's house when she was in jail and she was about to be executed. Of course, they let her off, which was at 49B Leinster Road, and it was called Surrey House, while she was in prison in the days after. And they looked after her dog as well. It was interesting what you were saying about the dog barking at the door. They love dogs, In 1916, AE wrote to A.J. Balfour, the Conservative leader of Westminster, arguing that half settlements or no settlements, any more than half payments of debts would satisfy creditors. Nothing less than colonial self-government would do for Ireland, and it was pure folly to think that a settlement which excludes Ulster would resolve the issue. And how right was he about that one? So in the 1917, Countess Markovich. So if you look here, I don't know if anybody can see this man here in the corner, the very corner, talking into people's ears. You see it? That's AE at the 1917 convention. So he's going around and telling people, this is what you should do, Yeah, is it? Wow, yeah. Right. That's good to know. They also had part of the convention in Dublin, where the City Hall in Dublin, or City Hall in Belfast, sorry. He developed his own constitutional proposals and served on the Irish Convention. It was chaired by his old hero, of course, Horace Plunkett. But he resigned when he saw that no worthwhile outcome was possible. So what happened really was they had agreed almost everything, except for, which is very poignant today, customs and excise. Wee bit of what's going on in the border at the minute there, They couldn't agree on it. So what they said was, well, we'll leave it to after Christmas. And so they went away for Christmas. And by that stage, somebody had been talking in the ear of the Unionists and told them, look, see if you push against this, you will get a border. You will get, Ulster, basically. So they came back and there was no dealing with them. So the people who lost out were obviously the Southern Unionists and the Catholics in the North. So the victors, and this is where when we talk about home rule was Rome rule, the Catholic Church obviously were delighted because they became the victors in the south of Ireland, and they did bring in Rome rule, really, And, he played a role in public life as a member of the Irish Convention and tried unsuccessfully to broker a compromise between the Nationalists and the Unionists in Ireland. In June 1816, he wrote to the British Cabinet Minister Arthur Balfour, proposing what he called colonial self-government for the whole of Ireland, but with a House of Lords vested with veto powers in order to reassure Ulster. So he was always trying to think outside the box. In December 1970, he published a passionate appeal against the division of Ireland, and he loved this. He called it economic. I can't even think of that word. Ecumenical Irish nationalism. Ecumenical Irish nationalism. It's hard to say, but a lovely word. And the Irish statesman Horace Plunkett, 23rd of May, Wednesday 23rd. Nearly every day I write to AE, so this is Horace Plunkett writing to him, and try to persuade him that the Irish statesman opens a vista of possibilities for the finest intellect and character in the Ireland of today. So that's what he's describing AE as. And he said, you need to express yourself in this new newspaper that they were trying to set up. I have promised the American underwriters a not provincial journal, and he is so obsessed with the Irish situation that he forgets the outside world. So Horace Plunkett, again, 1923, events occurred which made me reorientate my life. The rebels destroyed my home, the healthiest house in the world, and the meeting place of a splendid body of Irishmen and friends of Ireland. They destroyed it, and with it its records of the work for the life of a generation. All my correspondences with Roosevelt and Pinchot and Arthur Balfour and Bryce, George Bernard Shaw and AE, whose best pictures went to, with its glorious view of the Dublin Bay and the mountains, its little golf course and rock garden. And he was in America at the time that happened. So Frank O'Connor. So this is the paintings that go to the Armory exhibition. That's a list of them there, of AE's paintings. Come to that in a minute, I think. Frank O'Connor in Dublin, the arrangement employed. Right, so Frank O'Connor wants to go back to Cork. So AE gets him a job Ball's Bridge there in a library. They keep him there. So that's the kind of things he was doing, keep writers and people. So we'll move on to Gandhi now. In 1931, Russell was invited to meet Mahatma Gandhi in London, whose theory of null valence had been advocated by Russell in the Interpreters, but was unable to meet him as his wife fell ill. Violet was terminally ill, and he spent every day on her side. He never left her side. And people said about the two of them, maybe having difficulties. And I don't believe that, because I know he loved her. He loved her a lot. Madly in love with her. She died on the 3rd of February in 1932. They had been married for 34 years. In the collected works of Mahatma Gandhi, you find two significant references to George William Russell. Gandhi read AE's Candle of Vision, which he finished on February 1932, read during his imprisonment in Yeravada. He mentions in his letter of February 8, 1932 to Narendra Gandhi. More interesting, Gandhi refers explicitly to Russell's 1920s Interpreters, a symposium on the Platonic fashion, and he quotes him in the context of free temple entry for the Hara Jans. Whatever that is. Somebody can explain that to me. So, so this is the Armory exhibition. When we come to it, I haven't got that far yet. 17 Rathgar, Dublin. Dear Mrs. Porter, I may be going to London. This is A writing in a fortnight's time to see Gandhi. Two of his friends have written to me. He wants to see me as he has read books of mine when he was in prison and seems to have been inspired by them, though I fancy it's the economics and the national being which interested him more than the Candle of Vision, which he also studied in prison. So another letter to Panjamanada from Mahatma Gandhi on August 16, 1932. I duly got the grapes and the fruit, also the Candle of Vision. For all these gifts, Mother evidently forgot when she prompted you to buy this book for me that at her insistence, the poet already, you say, he had sent him a copy of it. So the Armory show has often been cited as a turning point in the history of art, showing into the national event as it was seen by record number of people for 4 weeks at the 69th Regimentary Armory in Lexington Avenue in New York, and then travelled to Chicago and to Boston. A gets billed along with Cézanne, Van Gogh and Gauguin. You can see all these wonderful, like this was dead and alive artists, by the way. And so what the Americans had decided was that their art was boring, and they wanted to put this exhibition on to show Americans, let's think outside the box and do something, original and all that. So dead and alive, all the great artists of the world, they put on this exhibition. And who's in the middle of them all? Hey, there's no Yeats mentioned there. Or none of the rest of the great artists of Ireland. The only ones mentioned is A.E. Russell. So obviously, he was thought of as a fantastic artist when he was alive. John Quinn's social connections and financial support were essential in bringing about the 1913 Armory Show at the International Exhibition of Modern Art, also known as the Armory Show in New York. Only 3 Irish painters were invited to contribute, including A.E. alongside Jack Butler Yeats and Nathaniel Holt. So they did exhibit at it, but they're not mentioned in the promotions of it. George Russell was introduced to Theodore Roosevelt by a Sligo man called William Corcoran, who was writing speeches for Roosevelt on his election as President of America. Roosevelt subsequently brought George Russell to Washington to advise him on the agricultural strategy, and we heard that wonderfully explained earlier on in their keynote speech. And this is where he met in 1933. It says here that he met Henry Wallace, but we know from your talk that he actually knew him a lot earlier than that. And not only did he know his father, but he knew his grandfather as well. And most important role was as an editor of the Irish Statesman, when he strove to steer the new state in the direction consistent with his ideals and practical wisdom he had accumulated from his involvement in the Irish literary revival, the cooperative movement, and the Irish Convention. It was no small thing for a country emerging from civil war to have a literary figure as dedicated as A.E. in keeping watch. A.E. embodied a multitude of identities, various guises, including a mystic, economist, a painter, a poet, nationalist, journalist, naturalist, economist, vegetarian, an early supporter of women's suffrage, and he was one of the most recognisable individuals in the Irish culture and political life during the early 20th century, and remains a wonderful, much needed exemplar or paradigm. And that's what we were saying there, So we're coming to the end now. Thanks, God. We probably said that. So somebody mentioned Curran earlier on there, didn't they? You mentioned the Currans, didn't you? Yeah. So C.P. Curran. Over it. This is one of his paintings, 1,000 years hence, anyway. So this is, and a lot of days time, A.E., his 90th anniversary of his death will be coming up. And his good friend Curran had these sketches made of A.E. on his deathbed. And I think they're gorgeous. I know it might sound a wee bit ghoulish, but it is. I think they're beautiful. There's something serene about them. There's a sereneness, and Pamela Travers and all the people that was there when he died, they talked about the strange things was happening in the atmosphere, and like a moon never seen before, like that, and stuff like that. So that's another angle. So there's 3 of them. There's them 2. He just looks so just asleep, doesn't he? And that's the final one. So I'll finish off there and I'll leave that there. Just looking at A.E. Russell. Any questions though?
Jimmy, that was amazing.
Thank you.
I've never seen that.
Well, if anybody wants, I can share them with them,
Can I ask a question? I was very struck by the other artists who were exhibiting.
Yes.
The artists such as Duchamp and Monet. So he was really seen as quite avant-garde then.
Oh, he definitely was. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It was. He was no. Look, he was no backwater artist. But you have to remember what A.E. was. As I said earlier on, he was Markovitch's power. Said he created the modern identity of Ireland, and his idea was to do indigenous things or make things different from everybody else. So he was encouraging people to write differently from the rest of the world and to paint differently from so he was trying to create like an Irish character for artists. And you can see he was influential on a lot of the great Irish artists, and so yeah, he was avant-garde is the perfect word for it,
I was just astonished.
Yeah.
To see that, not knowing about A.E. very much forward.
Yeah.
Is there a major study on his paintings at all? That can be
We
seen
have
together?
the lady that did the study on them. Unfortunately, she took breast cancer and died, and she handed all that work over. It's in the hands of a Limerick lady, Kelly, Terry Kelly, but we don't know where she's going with it. You know, it just seems to have went into limbo.
Right.
But there was definitely a study done. So you know, so we're hoping to encourage Terry Kelly to produce that at some stage. You know, um, yeah, yeah, it'd be nice. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, Joan wanted to ask a question.
Oh, but not about his visual art. I was curious about his visit to the Albert Hall. Was he sick that day when he talked, or was it his accent?
Yeah,
I
they did.
read some reports where people couldn't hear him or
Yeah.
couldn't understand him.
Yeah, that's what they said. They could. He mustn't have been able to project his voice very well or something. You know, because they said they couldn't hear what he was saying,
Right.
but his speech was reproduced. You know, and so a lot of people were able to read it. You know, so.
What was his accent like? I mean, what was it?
Well,
a North?
we have a recording of him somewhere. Yeah, and it was definitely he actually. There you go.
My name is George Russell, though I have always published my poems under the pseudonym of A.E. This poem, which I am going to repeat to you, I call The Gates of the Mountain. It was written by me after speaking to a small farmer in the west of Ireland, who told me of a vision he had of Queen Maeve, the queen of the western host of fairies, and it moved me so much that this small farmer should have seen the things that kings and princes desire to see, that I went away and wrote this poem. It's a lonely road through bogland to the lake at Carramore, and a sleeper there lies dreaming where the waters lap the shore. Though the moth wings of the twilight in their purples are unfurled, yet a sleep is filled with music by the masters of the world. There's a hand as white as silver that is fondling with his hair. There are glimmering feet of sunshine that are dancing by him there, and half-open lips of fairy that were dyed a fairy red. In the revels where the hazel tree its holy clusters shed. Come away, the red lips whisper, all the world is weary now. 'Tis the twilight of the ages, and it's time to quit the plough. Oh, the very sunlight's weary ere it lightens up the dew, and its gold is changed and faded before it falls to you. Though your calling's heart be tender, a tenderer heart is near. What's the starlight in our glances when the stars are shining clear? Who would kiss the fading shadow when the flower face glows above? 'Tis the beauty of all beauty that is calling for your love. Oh, the great gates of the mountain have opened once again, and the sound of song and dancing falls upon the ears of men, and the land of youth lies gleaming, flushed with rainbow lectern mirth, and the old enchantment lingers in the honey of the earth.
So what's interesting about it is, my granny, and you said it sounds like Allah, don't you think it sounds a bit like Allah?
Sounds like a girl like Donnie O'Donnell.
Well, it's the way he says plough and now, now and plough. And we would say in Lurgan, we would say things like blackbird, a blackboard. We call it blackbird, so, but they built Craigavon, and when they built Craigavon, there was a big influx of people from Belfast came in, to Lurgan and around that area. So I think our accent has changed, but it's become sounds more a wee bit Belfast-y sound, So it definitely sounds definitely like my granny. That's the way she spoke, the way he spoke a wee bit like. But he's doing that. He was doing that. That was his method of rhyming. It was the slow and rhyme.
And he definitely retained his northern
Oh
blasts.
yeah, 100%.
Towards the latter years, I would imagine, in this recording.
I often wonder, can you judge character in a person's voice? I've never heard of speaking, and I see a very gentle man behind that voice. Do you agree, or am I just talking cobblers?
Oh, but I think you could be right. I think I was maybe recorded in America in the 30s. Probably, but.
Compare Hitler, Yeah.
But that was the tempo they had this tempo that they would, it was almost like Gregorian chant to them, they were, so they were.
On the point of Gregorian chant, why was he singing that song? He was almost singing, he wasn't speaking. Was
Yeah.
there a reason?
But they called them songs.
Okay.
Each of them called them songs, and he wrote the what do you call the one, the songs for friends or something like that. There, they called them songs. That's what they called them, and so, but each was the maestro at he would work at them and work at them and work at them, or he would just he think he was channeling them. Somebody else said about it was yourself saying about the Frenchman said he was channeling these things, and he believed that he was channeling them as well. So, but each would work at them for maybe a year before he get the poem right. Or he just says no, that's the way it is, and
did he ever have any musical accompaniment to his?
well, apparently the both of them, yes, there's a lot of them have been recorded by classical, like Arnold Bax. We talked about the Bax brothers there earlier on. Arnold Bax and his brother Clifford Bax. I think they have put some of the poems to music. But there's other Irish classical people have put to music, and Yeats's as well,
Yes.
But
during his lifetime, did he encourage that kind of an accompaniment? They
Well-
did in the early.
well,
modern
both
period.
Yeats and they were tone deaf. Both of them were tone deaf, yeah. And they admitted that themselves, they were tone deaf.
What is this thing that Ramon played to us? It's a recording founded by Ziggy, but
Yeah.
It's just a tape, or
I think it's a record. I think it might have been recorded on a record, or something like that.
a record.
Uh, but-
Alan Benson.
Yeah.
So Alan Benson spoke in 1961 of the bibliography of AE. There's a section about how AE went to Columbia University, and he recorded it on a professor there's vinyl tape. Then a few years later, apparently his office got ransacked, and someone tried to kind of put on this on vinyl, but apparently it's scratched, and so apparently the thing was broken. However, that being said, because he did tour a lot on the national level from state to state, he did apparently give his voice on different recordings. So it could well be one of those different ones.
And there might be more out there, but I'll email Ziggy again so you can.
Would American radio archive
Yeah.
hold them probably?
Apparently there's a load of interviews with him on radio in America somewhere, but but it's tantalizing. But Sarah talked about an award for students to go over and study stuff in America. I like that would be powerful, if you could get somebody like I'm not getting any younger, and Michael's not getting any younger.
What about film? AE in film?
Apparently there's a film somewhere of them as well. It's 10 minutes or something, or a couple of minutes, not even a couple of minutes of them in the background somewhere walking.
Jimmy, was it you who told me that he was inspired by Pamela Travers and he was putting as a character in Mary Poppins as well?
Yeah,
Private-
yeah, Pamela.
private bank and
Yeah,
stuff, that lot of
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah. So he give the idea of Mary Poppins to Pamela. Pamela Travers comes to meet AE. Her father had read all AE's books and all that. Now, in the film Saving Mr. Banks, it's Yeats and people like that he'd been reading, but it wasn't. It was AE Russell he was reading in the real life. And so she wants to meet this wonderful AE Russell. So she comes over to Ireland and she gives him a couple of her poems and he publishes them. And he tells her now, this young girl, come back and see me again and all this here. She doesn't come back to him. And AE gets over on the ferry, goes over, bang, 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 load of books. But he always give people books for some reason. There's your books. And you're a naughty girl, you didn't come back to see me. So she then does come. And the two of them become great friends, and she sees him as this god. She calls him the sun to her wee flower, like, you know, and adores him. And so he gives her this idea of like, I think it was mixed up with, you know, the Irish Cailleach, the witch, but mixed up with an English nanny. So she writes this Mary Poppins, but there's 7 books of Mary Poppins, and they were never children's books. They're full of metaphors. They're theosophists. They're all about theosophy and mysticism, all right through them. And if you know where to look for, you can see all these metaphors in them, all right through them. And so, for instance, at the start of she bases Bert the chimney sweep, right, on AE, and at the start when AE's chalking or Bert's chalking on the path, right, in AE's paintings there's always metaphors in the paintings as well. So, and in Mary Poppins they talk about it's behind the trees, it's hidden behind the trees. And so they jump into these magical paintings, and they're in this magical world, right? So that's the metaphor there. And another great metaphor is, the carousel, right? So we talked about, was it yourself or people were talking about the chakras, the 7 chakras. Who was talking about the chakras? James North was on about the chakras. So the 7 horses, the 7 chakras are on the carousel, all different colours, and they're on poles, so they're under control. So the thing about, they believe that you have to keep your chakras under control, your emotions under control. The horses are under control. The next scene is with the little fox, and he's being chased by the redcoats on horses. And Bert and Mary Poppins and all, and they're on the horses, and they're being chased by these redcoats. And the bit that everybody misses is the fox is Irish. Not only is he Irish, but he's Disney Irish. He's Irish, this real Irish. Yeah, and everybody misses that bit. But and here's the metaphor coming now. So they're chasing this fox. Bert, who's based in AE, saves the fox, scoops up the fox, and he turns around. The fox turns around to the redcoats, and he says, "Amazons, Amazons, dirty Amazons," he calls them. So the fools, and this is a bit like
Abaddon means fool.
fool. That's right.
Irish.
The Irish fool. And it's a bit like, was it Wilde said about the uneatable, the unthinkable chasing the uneatable?
Yeah.
Same metaphor, exactly the same metaphor. And probably that's who he was thinking of when they put it in there, or Pamela Travers put it in there.